going to talk about? I'll give you an executive summary up front here. Changes in customer buying behavior in the last couple of years have created new challenges and opportunities for those that spend time in pricing. The complication is that while many organizations have built pricing groups within their company, a lot of the work has caused us to be ill-prepared for these changes in customer behavior. So the implication is that new capabilities are required for this new economy that we've been talking a lot about this morning. So it's our position that companies need to do 6 things in pricing. And I'll talk more about these in the presentation. 1 is focus on speed. 2nd is segment your pricing along the lines of no touch, low touch, and high touch processes. 3rd is embrace variable pricing. There's a new world, and I'll give some examples of how pricing is much more variable and to compete in that environment. And many pricing organizations aren't prepared for that. 4th is build trust in the artificial intelligence. Pricing is a very complicated discipline, and I think it's been proven that the machines can help absorb this information and help make better decisions. 5th is not just focus on price automation, but think about optimization. And then lastly is to modernize the pricing organization. And we believe that companies, if they do these things, it'll help them face these new challenges in changes in customer buying. I'm going to cover 3 topics. First is the history of the pricing profession. 2nd, key changes in customer buying choices. And then lastly, what are the new modern commerce capabilities required to win? So first, let me spend some time on the history of the pricing profession. And I'm going to do this not just for reminiscing sake about what everything's been done in pricing, but I think it's important to understand where a lot of companies stand today. They've built these processes from pricing and why they were built, and why, at least in our opinion, that it makes it hard to meet these new challenges. So first I want to go back to 1992. There was a seminal article in the Harvard Business Review by colleagues of mine, Mike Marr and Rob Rosiello. So it was before I joined. And this was at one time one of the top 25 articles in the Harvard Business Review. And there were 2 big ideas that came out of this article. The first is the sensitivity of profits to price. And Mike talked about this earlier from Land O'Lakes about how if you change price, what's the impact on operating profit? If you change price by 1%, has an 11% improvement in operating profit compared to 1% improvements in variable costs, volume, or fixed costs. So the first big idea in pricing was you don't have to hit 5, 10% improvements. Just 1%, if you can get a little bit better, has a huge leverage to your bottom line. So that was big idea number 1. Big idea number 2 was to measure the right price. So if you're going to try to find those 1 or 2% improvements, it's not just about list price or invoice price. Most B2B companies have a waterfall of discounts, terms and conditions, which affect the pocket price. In this case, a 39% discount from list price. So these were 2 big ideas. There was a lot of attention given to the article. I joined McKinsey in 1997. It was still a pretty small practice in the pricing profession in general, was just kind of starting at that time. But it wasn't until I call it the 2000 to 2010 timeframe where the pricing profession really started to take off. And the chart that I would use to, I think, woke up a lot of companies was the scatter plot. And if you're in any B2B company, this is typical of when you plot pocket price to volume across your customers, it's a virtual scatter plot. And so many companies facing financial challenges kind of woke up to this and said, boy, we have to do something about this. This is unacceptable. And so what a lot of companies did, their typical reaction was to apply analytics to the problem. It's to reduce authority level. So I'm going to take control. Obviously, they're not making the right choices in the field. I'm going to reduce authority levels. Control with organizational structure. At this time, there was talk about the chief pricing officer, the pricing czar, who could kind of make all the pricing decisions. So a lot of companies brought pricing control back to a central function, and even applying Six Sigma. Okay, if I want to reduce variation, I'm going to manage this process like anything else. Now the problem with that is this is what it created for a lot of companies, and we have lots of examples of this where it creates this dynamic of approvals, analysis to make these pricing decisions. And so while companies found opportunity in pricing, in most cases, it came at the cost of speed. So now during this time frame, 2000 to 2010, that's okay. There wasn't this expectation about speed and the customer buying decision. But in many cases, nowadays, companies are faced with multiple touch points, slow quote time, and ultimately lost revenue. So I would make the point that the history of pricing, there's been a lot of advancements. Most organizations have pricing groups. It's a discipline. You can get certified. But a lot of what's been done has been to manage this beast, which comes at the cost of speed and customer experience. To give you an example of this, this is high-tech manufacturing. When they looked at their pricing process, they did a time and motion study because they were wondering, why is this taking so long? Is it the product? Is it, interacting with customers? And in this case, 67% of the time to do a quote was pricing. It's getting the information in, analyzing it, running through approvals, back and forth, getting it out there to the customer. So pricing for most companies is a critical aspect of meeting this speed challenge. So lots of development, lots of processes to manage the beast of pricing, but has made it difficult to meet this new buying experience. And let me talk more about that. What are some key changes in customer buying choices and how it impacts pricing? So the new imperative, if you compare traditional commerce to modern commerce, traditional commerce is about the companies in control, guesswork, selling on gut instinct, relationship, online, offline silos, they're separate, they don't have to talk to one another, manual opaque pricing, standard predefined offers. Modern commerce is the customers in control. They're doing a lot of the research before they even talk to anyone, if they even talk to anyone. Selling on science, algorithms, machine learning, frictionless omni-channel experience, dynamic, transparent pricing, and I'll give some examples of that, and personalized offers. So it's a very different imperative in this new world of modern commerce. Let's look at some of these buying changes. The first one is that the sales experience is the new key lever to revenue growth. This was some research done by CEB before they were acquired by Gartner that looked at what are the traditional differentiators of company, brand, product, service, value to price. And they found that less than half of that was the key to revenue growth. And the new lever is around the customer buying experience. And the companies that can get all the other things in the ballpark but deliver on this buying experience have a higher opportunity for revenue growth. Unfortunately, when they also looked at the internal processes, salespeople said, to meet this sales experience, it's not about the product complexity or external complexity, it's about the internal complexity. That's the difficulty in improving the sales experience. So buyer change number 2 is speed is increasingly a competitive differentiator. This was a study done by UPS just recently that looked at reasons industrial buyers purchase via mobile, and speed was the number one reason. And when they compared that to different demographic groups, you'll see a big shift from baby boomers, Generation X to millennials about how likely they would be to move their business if they couldn't order via a mobile app. And most of this is moving. The new people coming in are increasingly demanding mobile apps and speed in their transactions. So all of the research is showing that sales experience and speed is increasingly becoming a competitive differentiator. And I'll give you an example of this. This is from HP, and it was we've worked with them for a number of years. It's a very successful project with them. And while margin improvement was important for them, the reason they chose to do optimization and dynamic pricing was essentially this chart. This chart was a wake-up call because they were getting lots of feedback from their resellers that HP was just difficult to do business with. And in fact, many of the resellers said, if I had a quote that I knew needed to be done quickly, I won't even send it to HP because I know it has to go through this convoluted process to get approvals. And when they did the comparison, they looked at their win rate, and if they responded more than 24 hours after the request for a quote came in, it was more than a 40% reduction in win rate. And there was a direct correlation between time and win rate associated with their business. So again, this was a wake-up call for them. It wasn't about just optimizing pricing. That was very important, but it was about meeting this new customer challenge around speed. Buyer change number 3 is that buyers quickly abandon sellers who do not put realistic prices online. The traditional way in B2B pricing is, well, you set a high list price, you want to keep that price expectation up there high, and maybe we'll catch someone that'll actually buy at list price. But the reality of the market is most of the transactions happen below the list price. The new world, however, is that buyers don't want to go through this process of researching, negotiating back and forth. And some of the research from Hanover, and this was just this year, is sellers are saying pricing strategy is the most frequently called reason for losing channel share. It's the most important thing driving buying decisions, and 54% say price and competition are the reasons they're losing deals. So from a mindset of pricing, these models that we've built over the years to say, no, we're going to get this second and third chance to win the deal, that's becoming increasingly difficult in this new modern commerce area. And I'll give you some analysis on this. And we looked at, this is agriculture and construction equipment. It's about 10 different categories. And we picked some areas that aren't $100,000 piece of machinery. They're anywhere from $2,000 to $20,000 pieces of equipment. Things that you can transact on that the expectation around negotiation isn't there. And we looked at the dealer pricing on this equipment. And it was interesting that almost 30% didn't even have pricing. It was call for price. And if you're a buyer, especially one of these new millennial buyers, you don't want to talk to anyone. You don't want to call someone for a price. You want to see, what's the price now? Is it fair? What else do I get within it? So almost 30% didn't even have pricing online. They wanted you to call someone to get the price. And then what we did is we looked at the published pricing of the 71.5% that actually put published pricing, and then compared that to market price. Now, the way we got market price was to look at Ritchie Brothers auctions on this equipment. So on comparable equipment, we looked at the actual transaction prices of what was had in the marketplace. And Ritchie Brothers, yes, it's an auction. It may attract a different kind of buyer, but it's a pretty efficient market. Most of their auctions have 10,000 plus people online or in person looking at these auctions. So we compared the published prices to the actual market prices on this equipment, and over 75% weren't even within 20% of the market price that was out there. So the message here is that if buyers expect realistic prices online, as pricers, we have to get comfortable with putting those market prices out there that could be transacted upon. And we have a long way to go in most B2B companies to get to that comfort level. Buyer change number 4, I call Judo pricing. So if you've ever practiced the art of Judo or followed it, there's a thing in Judo where it's they don't come out just swinging or getting right away. It's a lot about understanding the balance of your opponent. You push, you shove, you look for weaknesses, and then you act upon it. In Judo pricing, it's about finding that, and this is an example on a fairly typical product. These are HP black inkjet printers, HP 61, which is a fairly common product. And this is an example of how the Amazon price in green has compared to the third-party prices over a 3-year period. And you can see they're kind of going back and forth. They start, they're testing prices at various levels, going back and forth, and learning along the way of how does the price gap impact volume. And most pricing organizations aren't prepared to do Judo pricing. It's kind of we set price once a year, we adjust it with cost changes, and not in the mindset of this, I'm looking for weakness, I'm testing, I'm looking for opportunity going forward. It was interesting here that at the end it looks like they kissed and decided on $34.99 for the right price. But the point is there's much more dynamic pricing going out there, and companies need to get comfortable, because in Judo, if you just stand there, you're going to be thrown to the floor and probably put in an armbar in short order. So it's a new world of competing in this new type of competition, to be able to understand how it works, understand where your price position should be. The last buyer change I'll talk about is buyers are accepting of algorithmic, or more accepting of algorithmic price determination. If you ask people 10 years ago, if you're buying from a supplier using AI optimization, a lot of them would kind of get upset with that. Well, am I being sort of cheated out of this? But this was some interesting, it was B2C research by Forrester that looked at the perceptions around companies doing pricing. And what they found in some of the qualitative around it is, first, only about 21% thought it was somewhat unfair or not fair at all. But some of the qualitative feedback was, I actually trust a company that uses data to set prices as opposed to this face-to-face negotiation that's happening. So the buyer change that we're seeing is, you have dynamic pricing in sports and entertainment and airlines for many years. Buyers are becoming much more comfortable with dynamic, optimized pricing than in years past. So lots of changes happening around speed, around the acceptance of dynamic pricing, around Judo pricing, et cetera. So what are things that we believe companies should do to win in this environment? This first slide is kind of a summary of, what's the riskier business of getting pricing wrong in this environment? Slow, I can't quote quickly enough. It's static, I don't move with the market, I'm left behind when the market's moving. It's impersonal, it's not specific to customer segments. It's siloed, I talk to a salesperson and then I get a different price from online or on a inside sales. And inconsistent, I have variation in my pricing that is inconsistent and maybe creating low price expectations. So what's the call to action? First, focus on speed. Second, segment your processes for no, low, and high touch. Third, embrace variable pricing. Fourth, build trust in the AI. Fifth, accept that price automation is not enough. And lastly, modernize your pricing organization. So I'll go through each one of these with some examples. The first is to focus on speed. I've talked about this, and it was talked this morning about it's the new currency. You can't expand time. You only have a limited amount of it. And so action number one is really think about your own pricing organization and how it affects your speed to customers and your speed to responding to the market. This is an example of Brazil Foods, who's been a customer for a few years of ours, where the problem that they faced in the past is about 50% of their sales are commodity products. So these are food items that are changing by the day or sometimes by the hour. And their pricing process took, on average, about 15 days. So once they got the cost changes, they would have to run a bunch of analysis, determine what to do. That would take some time. They had some limitations in their ERP system where they can only batch about 50,000 prices per batch to do the processing. And they had 400 sales organizations that they had to do this for because it was local market pricing. So all of that consumed 15 days. They reduced that down to about 3 or 4 days, so 70% faster in implementing technology to do it. And it allowed them to be much more responsive to the market, being able to deal with these cost changes, market changes going forward. So think about your own pricing process. Look at what it's doing, how that's impacting the customer experience, as well as your ability to react to the market. So again, I think if you look at the history of pricing, a lot of the processes that have been built up haven't even thought about the speed element to the market. But really thinking about that as one of the evaluation criteria of what you do in pricing is going to be important. The second call to action is to segment your pricing process. So this is the HP example again, and when they faced this issue of long quote turnaround times, they looked at, well, how do we actually do pricing? And about 80 to 90% of their pricing they called high touch. So pricing would come in, they'd start with this high list price, they would go through this analysis. If it was below a certain margin threshold, it would have to be approved. Maybe more analysis would have to be done, and it just took a long time to do it. What they moved is the opposite. Now 80 to 90% goes into a low or no touch type of process. So instant pricing, it's immediately available, and it's competitively priced products. They actually had to go through the analysis and say, you know what, we may miss some of this high pricing that we got before, but we're going to gain much more by being able to have competitive prices in the market. And then low touch was personalized pricing through the partner and was a little bit better than no touch pricing, but still could be done without touching HP. And they did maintain the high touch. These were the $10 or $100 million big contract deals that the customers expected for it to take time, and the company had to do the due diligence around it. And we think it was a great model to think about of, okay, it may be unrealistic to move everything online, but can you segment your market and say, boy, what's the benefit I could get by putting more realistic prices online and consumable immediately? What might I give up for that versus what I'm going to gain? And for HP, it was huge, as they've said publicly over $200 million in margin dollars associated with the change. They signed up 12,000 new resellers with this program, and it was cited as one of the most important things of signing in with HP is just this ease of doing business. So I would encourage you to think of your own pricing process, and is it a little bit too tilted to the high touch, and what can you give away and have trust in that so it can be done more quickly in a self-serve basis. Action number 3 is to embrace variable pricing. Jim Collins talked this morning about the Fortune 500, 15% aren't there. This is a great example in appliances, and I also showed that example on HP printers of how the variable pricing is becoming much more pervasive today. And this is an example on microwave ovens, how Amazon, in the period of 24 hours, had 9 price changes, Best Buy a little bit better, 2 price changes, and Sears 0 price changes. It's clear that when you look at companies that are now selling more online, thinking about this Judo back and forth, testing, getting feedback, and doing this again. And again, most companies don't have the pricing processes, technology, organization to do this. So really think about, well, how often do we change prices right now? What if there's a world where we have to change it intraday? How are we going to approach that? What information are we going to use? What kind of tools are required in order to do that? Action 4 is build trust in the artificial intelligence. And my view, I spend a lot of time with salespeople, and it's interesting when you look at the decisions that are made in pricing. And I think it mirrors a lot of other psychology research that's been done, is that our brains are kind of wired to find a way in our history in the past and just apply that and not have to think things over again each time. It's not like we walk, we have to think, okay, right foot in front of the left. No, as soon as we learn how to do that as a kid, it sort of becomes ingrained in our mind. And a lot of pricing decisions are like that. And a lot of salespeople out there, it's a lonely job. I'm using my own experience, intuition, in order to form judgments about where I should set prices. And this is an example of just some of the complexity when you look at what drives willingness to pay. And this is for an industrial company that looked at attribute importance. And so the product centricity, a category, industry, subsegment, all of these things were factored in. So this is a company that had thousands of products. And if you think of a salesperson out there, how can you realistically take all this information, process it, and make a good decision that's out there? Versus what AI and optimization does is that salesperson's not alone. They're bringing the whole company, the whole history, information from the outside to help inform that decision and make better judgments. So our action number 4 is really build trust in the AI and the optimization and the science around pricing because it's proven to make better decisions in the long run. And one example of this is in the technology area where this company implemented the solution across countries. So it was across 70 different countries. And what they wanted to do with the optimization is they wanted to give the finance group control over, okay, I'm going to take the science, but I might adjust it based upon my own objectives because they were measured and rewarded on their own country performance. And they found across these 70 countries that some countries were like, once they got the science and the optimization, they sort of let it run. But then you had others, sort of control freaks, that would want to go in. They'd always be adjusting the guidance and out there. And they found empirically that they underperformed relative to the ones that trusted the technology because it took into account market movements, what's going out there. So I'd encourage you to think of, well, how can internally can we build this trust in the AI around pricing? Pricing, it is the number one thing that impacts profits. It's hard to give that trust away, but it's been proven that the machines are better at processing all of this complexity. And I'll give you another example of this. This is in the printer business. So I talked about dynamic pricing that changes. This is the guidance given on printers by customer, by deal over time. You can see on average, it's about a 15 to 18% margin type of business, but it's highly variable, up and down. Some cases, 25, close to 30%. In some cases, it's 0 or below 0. And you may ask, well, why would we ever do something like that? What this company wanted to do is to understand the lifetime value of the sale. So when you sell a printer, you can have services associated with it, or you can have consumables, your ink associated with the printers. And so what you're seeing here on the ones that go below 0 is these are price-sensitive customers. However, they also have a high propensity to get this add-on service and consumables business. So what the science was able to tell them is that this isn't about I'm giving a low price because they told me my price is too low. It's because empirically I'm able to measure what's my probability of getting that add-on sale of consumables and service. And again, this is something from a person making that decision, very hard to factor all those things, understand those probabilities. And industry, other things come into the optimization. So these are just some examples of the complexity that comes from the pricing and how the machines can help you make better decisions around that. The fifth action is accept that price automation is not enough. So this was a study recently by Simon Kucher Partners that looked at digitization initiatives that companies invest in, and then the visible top-line impact. Increasing sales process efficiency, reducing costs, lots of effort around there, but not so much return on top-line impact. On optimized pricing, less so from an investment standpoint, but those that have invested in it have had a very high return, the highest return of any of those investment initiatives. So when thinking about digitization and pricing, don't just think about automating the pricing process, but think about the optimization part of it. The last action is around modernizing your pricing organization. So I made the point that a lot of organizations have grown up because of this, the scatter, putting process and controls around it. And the traditional pricing organization is there to protect pricing and margins. It's creating controls to manage, monitor, and execute pricing, creating pricing models to match price to value, value-based pricing, that's the holy grail. 80% execution, 20% strategy. And if you talk to many B2B companies, they would agree that in a lot of cases it is that. It's not as much time to focus on the strategy. This new world of buyer changes, we believe, is enabling a nimble market-based pricing, help transition to no-touch pricing. So as an organization, how can you lead your company to be comfortable with this crown jewel of what affects revenue and profitability to move to no touch? Implementing repeatable, largely self-running dynamic pricing model. This is building the trust in the AI. You can't just say, trust me. You have to say, how am I going to build this trust in the company? How am I going to run it in certain markets to get, show that it's better than what we're doing today? So that's a leadership challenge as much as a technology challenge. And then the last one is around continuous ideation and testing of assumptions and strategy. And we see this from a number of our customers. They get up and running, they get impact, and then they start asking questions. Hey, what if we be more aggressive in this market and see what happens? And say, okay, well, run that test, see what happens, measure it, learn from it. And that's a very exciting part of pricing in an organization to figure out the art of the possible and run these scenarios and see what happens. So I've talked about the pricing history, that pricing has come a long way, that we built these pricing organizations to deal with the impact on the bottom line, to measure the right price, to deal with this scatter. I would challenge that a lot of what we've built makes it difficult to meet the new challenges of changes in customer buying behavior, the importance of speed, being able to deal with variable dynamic pricing out there in the market. And we believe companies need to do 5 or 6 things to respond to this. Focus on speed, segment your process on no, low touch, high touch. Embrace variable pricing, be more comfortable with that, build the systems to do it. Build trust in the artificial intelligence. Don't just do price automation, and then modernize your pricing organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig. Thank you. And so with that, we'll open it up for questions. Via the app in this session, you can ask a question, and I'll receive it right here for you. And then can we also get some mics for questions too? I have a couple questions right here in the app. So the first one, Craig, is in the lubricants and grease markets, is Pro seeing any momentum towards a change in the price adjustment process, which is currently 3 to 4 times a year?
In the lubricants market?
In the lubricants specific market, that was the question.
I am not familiar with the lubricants market. I apologize.
So how about more generally, can we ask this question of, I think in a lot of businesses, I've worked as a pricer before where we had a typical annual price change. It was very slow, contract sort of price basis. What are you seeing from a generally?
In general, I would say absolutely. So I know when I started in pricing 20 plus years ago, it was like, well, we have once a year to do it. It's becoming much more dynamic. Very few companies are kind of straddled with the catalog that they have to print. I know some are, but not all. And so very much so. And the empirical data has also shown that there's more variability in cost that has happened. And so companies have realized that we can't just do once per year. And so being able to change those prices on an ongoing basis is important. So and so I know in gas, it's now in wholesale gas, not lubricants, but it's gone from daily pricing to now real-time pricing. Just as an example, this was a few years ago. It was a very dynamic market. It was by the day. Now it's real-time.
Fantastic. I'll open it up for the mic. Does anybody here have a question? Awesome. Oh, you got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Craig.
Hi.
So you characterize the B2B pricing environment as kind of high list price, lots of negotiation. And as you've seen that transition to putting more realistic prices online, are you seeing that reduces the level of price negotiation that customers want, or just lower the bar for the start of that conversation?
Yeah, we see it absolutely does reduce the amount of negotiation that happens. And what we've seen from the customers that have done this, because there's a lot of hesitation around this. Oh, okay, you look at, we're going to lose this top end customer, right? But what companies have found is, number one, less negotiation happening below it. And it's my belief, we're going to be testing this, is that customers are actually willing to pay a premium to not have to talk to someone. And so they would rather pay a little bit more rather than go through this negotiation process. So we've seen that it does result, and none of these models are ever implemented with the expectation that margins are going to go down. So there's lots of controls around that. But the other benefit that we've seen is to your point, our belief that they're willing to pay for it is the revenue and volume increases simultaneously. So I get more price and more volume associated with it.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Great.
With the intraday price changes you showed with the Amazon and Best Buy example, I was wondering if Pros has any technology to crawl competitors' website, take that into account for pricing.
Yeah, we specifically don't have the technology to do that. We usually take that information from third-party sites. So a lot of categories are now, we're getting that information. There's a lot of things that we have to be comfortable with to make sure, you're comparing apples to apples to use it. We haven't developed the technology to actually do that because there are some very good tools that already do it. So usually we consume that third-party input data. Mm-hmm. Platts is an example in oil and gas. We didn't develop anything more. We just take Platts information to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And we do have customers today who are doing this from a B2C standpoint, taking in competitive information and able to publish pricing in a dynamic way as well.
Thank you.
I have one more question from the app here, and it's, how would you protect yourself from a race to the bottom, with that 20% price discount to get that realistic online price?
Yeah, how would you protect yourself against a race to the bottom? Well, I think, if you look at the Amazon example on the inkjet, I think you have to go into it with the idea that not everyone, want that race to the bottom. There's testing about what the elasticity is, but all companies are out there to get a profit eventually, and so so I think you have to go into trusting it and know that the competitors aren't necessarily going to act irrationally. The research around price wars has shown that most price wars are started by unintentional actions. So I'm either misinterpreting a competitive behavior in the market, or I'm looking at the wrong price. Actually, I'll give you an example from lubes, because I had experience about 15 years ago, where in gas additives and lubricants, so one company said we didn't understand why Lubrizol was always, they just were acting irrationally. So there was about 50 major customers, and the company, they would win one at a reasonable price, then they would lose one, they'd win another one, then the price would go down. And what was interesting, when you looked at the history, when Lubrizol was putting out a low price, it was because they had just taken a deal that Lubrizol historically owned. So essentially what Lubrizol was saying is don't go after our customers. We have these, the 50 customers in the market. We think we have the ones that are natural for us. I'm trying to teach you not to go after, what's naturally my customer. And so that's just an example of how you look at irrationality, but in fact there's rationality around it. So I think that's part of the trust is, competitors are more rational than you think they are, and not necessarily wanting to go to the bottom.
Very interesting. Anybody else? Question for the mic? Awesome. Okay. With that, thank you so much, Craig.
Great.
That was a wonderful perspective.
Thank you.